Happy Wednesday, New Orleans Saints fans, and a special happy holiday Wednesday to our Bayou Blitz family. I'd like to welcome you to our final edition of the Bayou Blitz in 2022. I hope we're going to have a continuing to improve product in 2023. But it's certainly been a pleasure spending this regular season with you folks. I think it was been the last 6 months, 7 months since we started this show back. For those that don't know, I am Bob Rose. I am one of your hosts for the Bayou Blitz podcast. Joining me is my partner in crime and helping me to ring in the New Year Bayou Blitz style, Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, Brendan?
Doing good. Yeah, we get this is our last one before the new year, and we get to welcome you guys into the new year with a pregame show and a halftime show. So very exciting. Super thankful. I mean, I can't believe it's been, 7 months? Because I guess we started in July. So somewhere around there, 6-7 months since we started this thing up, and you and I have kind of corralled it and tried to take it a unique direction. And I think it's being taken well by you guys, whether you guys are longtime viewers or listeners or first-time viewers and listeners. So really appreciative of you guys. Somehow, some way, Bob, we're still talking about the Saints and the playoffs.
Playoffs.
I was gonna say, if I had the clip ready to go and I was a better producer, I would have just thrown it over ourselves. But nonetheless, yeah, playoffs. There's some unique scenarios. Obviously, the easiest one, we talked about it last week, is the Saints win out and the Bucs lose out. There is a scenario where the Saints could not win the NFC South and still get in as the 7th wild card, or the 7th seed, the final wild card spot. But I don't even want to go into how many different things would have to happen for that scenario to work out, because it's a laundry list.
Brendan, and that's why the last 3 weeks I have avoided adding it into my playoff scenario article that we update each week through the Saints News Network. But yeah, essentially it means 4 different teams have to lose. 3 different teams have to lose, or I take that back. 2 different teams have to lose their last 2. Saints have to win their last 2, and an additional 2 or 3 different teams have to lose 1 game.
Specifically,
and then you get into conference records and things like that. It's just, if the Saints beat Philadelphia this weekend, and if Tampa Bay beats Carolina, then I might double back, and maybe try to figure that out on my own. Again, you and I know the scenario. I just can't. I haven't been able to figure out why that scenario exists, as far as how far down the tiebreaker list it goes. So, like you said, we're not going to make your heads hurt by you, Blitz family. Let's just stick to the scenario that Saints have to beat Philadelphia, Carolina, Tampa Bay has to lose to Carolina and Atlanta, and the Saints are the NFC South champs. If the Saints beat Philadelphia and Tampa Bay wins, that takes New Orleans out of NFC South competition. But we'll revisit that crazy scenario if and when that happens. We'll stop.
I will say the easiest scenario for the Saints to get out of the playoffs is if they lose. If they lose, they're done. That's probably the easiest way to describe that part of it.
Yeah.
But oh man, that one's a head scratcher, because like you said, Bob, you have 3 teams that have to win one of their last 2, but it can't be one or the other. It specifically has to be against opponent X. Yeah. And then it's the whole tiebreak thing, and you're just like, I don't know. If it's going to make Bob and I's heads hurt, it doesn't take a lot to make Bob and I's heads hurt. But nonetheless, we don't want to inflict that pain onto your brains either. Instead, let's talk about something joyous that may happen to help your brain, stimulate the brain, release those chemicals and all that stuff. I'm pretending to be a doctor now. It's not a good idea either. But nonetheless, the Saints actually are on their first winning streak of the season, which is coming a little late in the season. But nonetheless, the Saints go up to Cleveland. They take care of business against the Browns. A little bit of a nail biter there at the end. Some unnecessary nail biting for some of you. However, the Saints stick to the game plan. We knew the weather was going to be atrocious. It certainly was. It was a negative wind chill. It was single degrees. I think it was 9 degrees at kickoff. Wind chill was like negative 12 or 13, somewhere in that ballpark. And Alvin Kamara had a wonderful quote after the game about how cold it was when they told him it was the coldest game in New Orleans Saints franchise history. He said, yeah, that's some BS. And I guess that's the most PG way I could put it. But it was cold, and we knew, Bob and I both knew, that running the football was going to be vital. The Saints were not going to try to throw the football a whole lot. I believe we talked about it in the pregame show on Sunday. The ESPN beat writer for the Browns said just walking into the stadium, he didn't know how either team would complete a pass with the swirling winds and how cold it was. And we certainly saw examples of that throughout the ball game with the ball hitting receivers right in the hands. They're not able to corral it. One actually led to an interception. And simply put, it's like trying to catch a rock. It's not easy. And the Saints did a good job of not throwing the football a tremendous amount. I'm going to have to go back and look at the statistics on the day. But, listen, anytime that Alvin Kamara gets 20 touches, you're happy. You have 20 on the dot. Taysom Hill had 9 carries in that game. We both thought he'd be a little bit of an X factor for the Saints. And that crazy stat that I bring up every time I can remains true. When he gets at least 9 carries, the Saints are undefeated this year, which is ridiculous. They're 4-0 when Taysom Hill carries the ball at least 9 times. Let's see. Andy Dalton threw the ball 15 times in the ball game. And I was seeing if Taysom threw a pass, but he did not. The Saints run the ball as a team, if you include the Andy Dalton kneel, 39 times for 152 yards and 2 scores. Not very impressive when you say it that way. It's under 4 yards per carry. However, they did enough to win the football game, and they only let Deshaun Watson really beat them one time with his feet, and that was for the score. That was one thing that was a little concerning for me, was because of how mobile and elusive and athletic Deshaun Watson is. And Nick Chubb got his, but Kareem Hunt didn't even record 10 yards. The Saints did enough at the end of the day. It wasn't pretty. It was not a memorable game. You're not going to go back and 20 years from now and be like, oh, you remember that game in 2020 when the Saints went up to Cleveland and beat the Browns? But it was enough to keep their playoff hopes alive. And for the first time, you saw a little bit of heart from this team. And I think that's just as important. You guys voted on our poll today, and we had a tie in the poll, and we'll get to it a little bit later in the show, but talked about players that still had something to prove, and Trevor Penning's performance. That's what tied. But, Bob alluded to it so well the last couple weeks. Even though the playoff hopes are bleak and the Saints season appears to be all but over, there's a lot of guys playing for money, job security, these last couple weeks. And there's coaches that are coaching for job security, specifically job security, more than money and incentives or anything, over the last couple weeks of the season. And for the first time, from the coaching staff down, which you and I have criticized the coaching staff so much this year, but from the coaching staff down, it looked like guys wanted to play for their jobs. They wanted to play for their incentives. Some of them wanted to play for contracts. And a really tough game, a lot of adversity, whether it be the injuries that the Saints had. I mean, there wasn't a lot of passes thrown, but who was playing wide receiver for New Orleans in this game, right? You had injuries to the offensive line. Honestly, you really just had Alvin Kamara at running back.
Yeah.
You go through all the adversity of injuries. You go through the adversity of having to change your travel schedule, which I don't think gets talked about enough from a pro athlete point of view, is how much, I don't want to say your whole life, but so much of your day-to-day life as an athlete is so precise to a schedule. You change just a little bit of that, and a lot of things get thrown off. The Saints had to move their whole flight up, right? And that's why you weren't in Cleveland. John wasn't
Mhm.
in Cleveland. I honestly don't know if a single member of New Orleans Saints media made the trip to Cleveland because of the weather. I can't think of one off the top of my head that actually made it up to the stadium.
Coming into Thursday, Underhill was quote unquote that Nick Underhill was quote unquote the last man standing. Everybody else, had either had their travel plans canceled or decided to cancel their travel plans because of safety reasons. I don't think Nick ultimately made it, but don't quote me on that. If he did, to my knowledge, he is the only one of the New Orleans direct New Orleans media that made it for the game. And Brendan, you're right. If you've been an athlete at any level, you know what a creature of routine athletes are. I certainly was. You can call it superstition, you can call it foolishness, you can call it whatever you want. But if you're that athlete and you have that routine, nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, interrupts it. And professional athletes are definitely no different. Whether it's getting ready for a home game, a 1 o'clock, a noon kickoff, a 3 o'clock kickoff, a nighttime kick. They have they alter their routines for that kind of thing. But for the entire team to have to change their travel arrangements and to deal with the injuries that they dealt with. I mean, Chris Olave being out is big under any circumstances. But like you said, the weather conditions kind of eliminated the passing game or certainly affected it adversely for both sides. What stuck out to me more was the Saints came into this game without one starting guard, Cesar Ruiz. They lost the other starting guard, Andrus Peat, before the end of the second drive of the football game. So, the Saints rushed for 152 yards. Taysom and Alvin, averaged about 4.6 per attempt themselves. So that's a pretty good number. And Andy Dalton, even though he only dropped back to pass 15 times, he did not get sacked and was really rarely even pressured. So that's a testament to the New Orleans offensive line. Defensively, you've struggled against the run for the better part of the year. You knew Cleveland was going to run the ball down your throats, A, because they had to, B, because that's who their identity is. And you managed to stifle that to the point where your defense was able to take control of the football game. I think, and you sort of hinted at this before, this is more this is more character and resiliency than I have seen from the New Orleans Saints at any other point this season. And if you're wondering if Dennis Allen is going to be brought back for a second season, and I have felt for the most part that he was going to be, I think that this kind of performance clinched it. They would have to have an absolutely embarrassing effort over the last 2 weeks for Allen not to come back. And I know the Sean Payton rumors are floating out there. We're not going to get into too much of that tonight because believe you me, folks, we're in for a long, long ride. We have plenty of time to break down that. Let's not break down completely unfounded rumors at this point. At this stage of the game, I think the strong betting money is Dennis Allen will be back as the New Orleans Saints head coach, in large part because of this kind of performance from the team this past week. These players they might not have played well the bulk of the season, some collectively, some more individually, but they have not quit on Dennis Allen. So when Mickey Loomis and Gail Benson sit down with the coach after this season, that's going to be the first positive thing that's brought up.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the other thing with that, Bob, is when you play with character and heart and drive, it shows in very minute things. And one of those things, at least for me, was the defense swarming to the ball, right? You saw a ton of that against Cleveland. You saw a ton of work by the ends and the interior of the line that pushed, whether it was Chubb or Kareem Hunt, out, right? They had to try to stretch the play out. And then you have linebackers, safeties, corners all merging and swarming to the football to make a tackle. I mean, that was one of the better games I saw from Tyrann Mathieu in the run game, something that he's been applauded for his entire career. I saw that. Well, that's a result of the guys in front of Tyrann Mathieu allowing him the opportunity to get there. There were so many minute things about what the Saints were able to do defensively that made me go, wow, I'm watching a completely different team than I have the whole year. Offensively, I've been as critical as anybody of how the offense has looked like, well, like a high school football team at times.
Yeah.
And this game was no different, but it wasn't because the play calling was bad. It was because, well, we kind of knew what you had to do, right? If the Saints came out in a wing tee, Bob, none of us would have been surprised at that point. You know, if they literally started running a high school offense because of the weather conditions, it wouldn't have surprised anybody. But they did do some things to change it up. Kamara was taking direct snaps. We saw more Taysom Hill. They had to make on-the-fly adjustments with the offensive line, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked. It worked well enough to win the ball game. And are they going to be able to replicate that week in and week out to where you only throw the ball 15 times? No. And the weather conditions are not going to be as brutal in Philadelphia this upcoming weekend as they were in Cleveland. It's still going to be colder than New Orleans, obviously. But, Bob, you're telling me it's probably going to be in the 40s. No snow, light rain, maybe rain. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to adjust back to being and playing a normal offense.
Mm-hmm.
But a game like this, like you said, Bob, like you alluded to, this is a game that you and I and the fans are not going to look back at and be like, man, do you remember that game? But in the offseason, when Mickey Loomis, Dennis Allen, and the big decision makers have to look back at some of these guys, I guarantee you this game against Cleveland is going to be a game where they go, oh, we want this guy back. Why? Look at what he did against Cleveland.
Right.
We don't want this guy back. Why? Well, look at his performance against Cleveland. When everybody else was doing A, B, and C to ensure a victory on the road, this guy didn't. Or vice versa. This guy was a vital part of us winning a must-win game against adversity and all that stuff. And the only other game that I can point to this season and say the Saints overcame adversity to win that football game was all the way back in week 1, which was a completely different football team.
Mm-hmm.
Because of injuries, because of style, because of all that. Week 1 to where we are today are completely different football teams in my mind. So this is the first time I've seen the Saints dig deep and get a win. And that's why this is one of the most important wins of the season. I think it's one of the reasons that it's not my favorite win of the season. If I'm being honest, week 1's my favorite win of the season. That was just fun. And that's what we expected throughout the whole year, but oh, how things changed.
Mm-hmm.
But this one is definitely a big, big win and a step in the right direction, not just for this season, because let's be honest, barring the odds look a little bit better. We might be up to a 5% chance that the Saints make the playoffs. But you still need a Christmas miracle to make the playoffs. This season's kind of in the trash already. But this is a must. This game was a must to kind of evaluate where everybody is. And you got a real good look, an evaluation of where your veterans are, where your rookies are, and where some of those fringe players are. And I think that's why this one is so important and should mean a lot, not just the organization, but the fans as well.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, it means a lot to the players individually too. And as a group, it's this kind of win under these kind of adverse conditions that would give such a confidence boost to a team riding into another negative situation. You're on the road at Philadelphia where you got your asses handed to you the previous 2 years. You're playing a 13-2 Eagles team that has a lot to play for themselves this week. I guarantee you that this Saints team has more confidence riding into this week's game than they would have had you taken the Cleveland game and the way they won it out of the equation. You win a game under such adverse weather conditions with the players out that were out. It makes you believe that you can go into just about any kind of situation and at least have a chance to pull out a victory. While the Saints are still staring in the hole at into the abyss, they might have a little bit of a sly grin on their face while they're doing it, saying, you know what, nobody expects anything from us, but we're riding pretty high coming off of this one. So maybe, just maybe, they have, in boxers' term, what's called a puncher's chance.
They might. The concerns that I have going into next week, and we'll get into next week here in a little bit, but this Sunday's matchup, talked about how bad the Saints have been against the run. Miles Sanders has been really good this year. And if Hurts plays, you got to deal with Hurts. If Hurts doesn't play, I still am a fan of Gardner Minshew and Minshew mania. No, he's not a starting star quarterback in this league, but he'll be a very quality backup. He'll have plenty of fans with the mustache and the attitude and everything. He's fun. And he was fun for Jacksonville for a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a good performance last week. He threw for 300 yards last week. This is Jalen Hurts might not play. Jalen Hurts is in the MVP conversation. He might not play, but even if he doesn't, that is not a make or break for this offense. It's not the same as Baltimore losing Lamar Jackson.
Right.
Baltimore loses Lamar Jackson, they lose their entire identity. You can try to replicate it, and they have a really good backup in kind of replicating it. But Philly loses Jalen Hurts. I'm not saying it's a plug and play because Hurts is a super talented guy, and I was on record saying I wanted the Saints to draft him in the second round if he fell out of the first round, and which he did, and the Saints didn't pick him up, obviously. But Minshew's more than capable of winning games at this point in the season if they believe that Hurts still needs the time to recover and they want to make sure he's 100% for the playoffs. But before we jump into the Eagles, over the next 10 minutes, I kind of want to discuss the two things that our fans and friends wanted us to discuss, and that was players that still have something to prove here over the last 2 weeks of the season. I see your Christmas tree's still up, Bob.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Christmas tree won't come down until mid-January. As a matter of fact, we talk about superstitions. If the Saints go on a winning streak and get into the playoffs, that Christmas tree, and as long as they keep winning, that Christmas tree is staying up until they don't.
There you go. Hey, everybody's got a superstition. But we're going to talk about some players that still have stuff to prove these last 2 weeks. We're also going to talk just a little bit about Trevor Penning. You guys voted for that. I'm going to be honest with you guys. There's not a whole lot to talk about. He's been thrown into jumbo sets, which tells me they're playing to his strengths at the moment, which we all knew was as a run blocker. He's a mauler. And specifically that touchdown run by Kamara. You go back and throw on the all-22 tape, and you just watch him drag his guy. It was like that scene in the Blind Side movie. Mike Orr just drags that guy over and throws him over the fence. That's what it was like, because Penning took him probably 15 yards the other way before just laying on top of him. And at that point that he just gives up and just lays on top of him, Kamara's already scored and Kamara's already celebrating. So that's the kind of guy that the Saints got, which is great. You just got to work on the pass blocking. So all I'll say about Trevor Penning is very much like the preseason, exciting to see him out on the field. Definitely a great run blocker. Definitely brings an aggression and an attitude to that offensive line. Still has those rookie mistakes. We saw some penalties the last couple weeks. But it's nice to see him getting reps, and it's nice to see him being effective in the things that were big strengths on his draft profile. And that's all I really have on Trevor Penning for now, Bob.
When Penning tore those ligaments in his foot in the preseason finale, and most of us thought that he was going to be lost for the year. So, positive number one that you have to take away from Trevor Penning is the fact that, like you said, Brendan, he was able to return just to get reps, and learn the speed of the NFL game a little bit better. Because of that, I think his development is going to be that much further along next preseason. And make no mistake, he has got to be the favorite to win the left tackle job next preseason. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, James Hurst would have beat him out for to open the season at left tackle this year. I'm convinced of that. And I like Hurst as a player, but I've also always said that his style, James Hurst's style, is better suited for interior play. He could be a starter at guard for most teams throughout the league, and we've seen that weakness play out in Hurst's game a number of occasions this year, most recently against San Francisco, against Bosa on the edge. Hurst has all kinds of problems with athletic edge rushers, and you're going to get a lot of those at either tackle spot, but especially the left tackle. Now, to your point, the biggest weakness in Trevor Penning's game coming into the NFL was footwork, pass protection footwork. So that is something that he is going to have to learn very, very quickly. But I think ultimately he is the better athlete than what James Hurst is. Hurst is still going to be an important part of this offensive line going forward in 2023. But the fact that we're seeing Trevor Penning get some snaps in an NFL game, granted, it's not in a traditional role, it's not in a pass protection role, but he is still learning the speed of the NFL game as a rookie, which is one step ahead of what a lot of us thought that he would be after he went down with that injury. And then as a run blocker, like you said, I mean, he is old school. A friend of the show, we're going to have him on once or twice this offseason. Kyle Turley. You see a lot of Kyle Turley style in Trevor Penning. He's a brawler. He's a fighter. He will beat on you until the whistle blows, and then a little bit beyond, which is what made Turley a cult favorite and a fan favorite here in New Orleans. I could see that same kind of trait developing out of Trevor Penning. I like the kid. Both you and I had him pegged as the Saints' second first-round pick. Correctly so, obviously. I think the future should be bright for this young man. And the entire Saints offensive line is playing with a certain bit of swagger and confidence over these last 3 or 4 weeks that we've not really seen consistently this year. Penning is certainly a part of that, as is Hurst, and all across the line. That kind of confidence, like we just mentioned with the entire team after a win in Cleveland, that kind of confidence when you're playing well as a unit, can be very infectious. And they're going to have their hands full this weekend against a very powerful and deep Philadelphia defensive front. It's the kind of game I'm interested to see Trevor Penning in, because Philadelphia is a very aggressive and physical defense. Penning is a very physical and aggressive player. So you're going to see some extracurricular activity. But for those of you that were whining and crying about the emotion that was supposedly left behind when Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was traded, Trevor Penning is that kind of emotional lightning rod. Only obviously on the offensive side. That's another thing to like about Penning, is just he's an uber aggressive, extremely emotional player, and again, that kind of thing can be infectious through the whole unit.
I'm glad you said Kyle Turley. There's a lot of comparisons between those two in terms of just energy, aggressiveness. I'll use the word nastiness on the offensive line. That was kind of Turley's bread and butter in New Orleans and St. Louis. Got him to the Pro Bowl a couple times as well. Like you said, friend of the show, we'll definitely have him on. He's a great guy, great guy to talk to. Still a great football mind as well. But I could definitely see Penning being a guy like that. The only concern that I have for Penning is a lot of those attributes and positive attributes we just mentioned go hand in hand with being a mauler in the run game. And if you never let those attributes kind of grow into also being a really good pass blocker, I wouldn't say he's going to be a bust by any means. But if he doesn't get that footwork stuff down and he lets the aggression just show out as a mauler, he's never going to be the well-rounded left tackle that you and I kind of pegged him as when the Saints drafted him. I always love the fact that you.
Now, fortunately, the Saints have 3 great offensive line coaches that he can draw from. And obviously Doug Marrone was brought back this offseason. I hope, even if he's the only official offensive coach that's retained, I am just fine with that. He is one of the best offensive line coaches in the game, be it college or pro. Zach Strief, a lot of people are comparing Penning to Turley. Penning could also be compared to a more athletic Zach Strief, because Strief had that nasty streak to him as well. Strief is a good guy to lean on as far as, okay, Coach Zach, how do I channel this? How do I use it to my advantage? How can I develop this through the rest of my game as I develop my game? And the third guy, he's not at least I don't think he's an official coach on the staff, but he's a guy that they brought in training camp, and a guy I think they're going to lean on more going forward is Jari Evans. Now, Jari played predominantly guard, but you will find no more better technician in the history of the NFL as far as blocking goes than Jari Evans, who also played with a little bit of a nasty streak. So between Marrone, Evans, and Strief, if two of the three or all three of those guys are still around, Trevor Penning has an endless pool of coaching talent to lean on and help him develop.
I'm glad you mentioned Doug Marrone, because remember earlier this season, a lot of us were harping on Cesar Ruiz. You want to talk about a guy who's going to win, in my book, at least my vote, of most improved Saint this season.
Yeah.
It's going to be Cesar Ruiz. He's finally living up to that first-round draft pick. It's a shame he went down with an injury because he was playing very well, despite the offense not producing points. Cesar Ruiz, and had to step up too with the injury to Eric McCoy.
Mm-hmm.
Played a little bit of center, a lot more guard, had to kind of do a little bit of both at times, and was definitely in charge of, and if you watched closely, completely in charge of the snap count.
Yeah.
With Cesar Ruiz when Andrews was playing center. So big ups to Cesar Ruiz. But where does that come from? All the things Bob just mentioned, and having those resources there to get better. I also have to give you credit, because every time you get the chance to, I really appreciate you going back and saying, for the first, at least for me, the first time and maybe the only time I've ever predicted, and you as well predicted 2 first-round picks correctly by New Orleans. I've never, in the however many years I've been covering the Saints, I've never got it right. So to get 2 in one draft, that was something I'll cherish.
Yeah, me too. And I'd been predicting Chris Olave to the Saints since November. But before that, the only draft successes I've had as far as predictions go, I did predict Marcus Williams to the Saints in the second round in 2017. And believe it or not, and Kyle, our boss Kyle Mosley will back me up on this, I predicted that the Saints would draft Chauncey Gardner-Johnson the year that they got him. Now, I predicted it would happen in the second round with their very first pick that particular year, and of course, CD Deuce dropped until the 4th round. But those have been, in my media career, those have been the only other 2 draft picks that I've gotten right for the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, I hadn't got one yet, so I'll take 2 in one draft for sure. Both being first rounders as well. Definitely take that. Well, let's hop into just a few players that need to, maybe your top 2 players that need to step up these last 2 weeks, whether they're playing for an extension, whether they're playing with their jobs on the line, whatever they're playing for at this point. Bob, who are your top 2 New Orleans Saints that need to show up the last 2 weeks of the season?
I'm going to go one on each side of the ball, and I'll start defensively. I'll start with defensive end, Cam Jordan. Listen, it's not that Cam has played poorly. Anybody, and I'll die on this hill, anybody that says he's in a sharp decline, you don't know football. So again, it's not as if Cam has played poorly, but Cam Jordan has not been the major difference maker that he has been throughout the bulk of his career. Now I believe he's 2.5 sacks shy of tying Ricky Jackson for the official franchise, as the official franchise sack leader. And that's a big record. That record has stood since 1994. So Team accomplishments are much more important to Cam Jordan than individual, but the individual accolades mean something to him. And plus there's this. Marcus Davenport is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. I think it's a safe bet that he will not be back in a New Orleans Saints uniform. It's not that the Saints don't like him, it's just that he is going to command that much money on the open market. The Saints are gonna be looking to cut cap space in other ways throughout the roster. Cam Jordan could be a potential cap cut because of his salary and his age. He'll be 33. He'll turn 34 years old this offseason. Now, again, he's still playing at a pretty good level, but is it a level that is commensurate with the salary that he is making? I would have to say no, not based off 2022. So, for Cam to solidify his spot on the New Orleans Saints roster in 2023, I'd like to really see him close out strong. Not to mention the fact that they're going to need him. It's all hands on deck right now if you're making a push for the playoffs. And if the Saints squeak in by a hair's length, which is what we're talking about, it's going to be because of guys like Cam Jordan at making a difference. Now, do you want to do yours first, or do you want me to do both of mine right off the bat?
We'll swap and go back and forth. We'll make it fun. I do want to throw this out there since you said it. Cameron Jordan has 112 and a half career sacks. He has not recorded a sack since the Pittsburgh game. He had a half sack in that game, so he's at 5.5 for the season. Remember, the other record that's going to be on the line for Cam over the last 2 weeks is going to be his streak of consecutive years with at least 7 sacks.
Yeah.
Is on the line. Obviously, his rookie year, he did not, but every year since 2012, he has recorded at least 7. He's at 5.5, and you said he's 2.5 away from Jackson for the franchise mark. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see if that happens. For me, I'll take one offensively, and it's gonna surprise. I don't think it's gonna surprise anybody. I mean, you could really pick anyone from this position group, but I'm gonna go with Marquez Callaway. Is playing for a roster. He's gonna be playing for a roster spot.
Yeah.
I think the Traquan experiment is finally over. As many times, and Bob knows it well, as many times as I said, he's a great run blocker. He's going to earn a spot on the team as a run blocker, and you can go down the list. Right? We can go down them real quick if you want to. Brandon Coleman made the team over the years as a run blocker. We can go down that whole list and that whole tree if we want to. But you can pick receivers from 2006 all the way to now, essentially the Sean Payton era plus a year, that have strictly made the roster because they could run block effectively. One of my favorite Saints was a deep threat and a run blocker. Joe Morgan made the team because he could run go routes and he was a decent run blocker. That's essentially what Traquan Smith was, and it just didn't work. So, Bob, you might finally be put out of your misery after this season. But Marquez Callaway is definitely playing for a roster spot. I almost wanted to say Shaheed, but we have a whole offseason to talk about Shaheed versus Hardy. That's going to be a really interesting one. But I'm going to go with Callaway because, remember, a season ago, Callaway was supposed to be the number one guy. He was the number one guy because of injury. He was supposed to be the fantasy breakout star, and he wasn't. In his defense, he was the Saints' leading receiver. He had 600, 700 yards, somewhere in there. Had a couple scores. Had some moments. And this year, when he's been called upon because of injuries to Jarvis Landry, again, this is like the second or third time Landry's been hurt. Michael Thomas's injury. He's been called upon to be essentially receiver 2 behind Olave. And Callaway has came up just a wee bit short this year. And I'll pull up the stats while I have it.
It won't take long.
I know. But Callaway, a season ago, was the Saints' leading receiver with 698 yards and 6 touchdowns. This season, in 13 games, Callaway has 16 receptions for 158 yards and 1 score. He has not stepped up and proven he can be a quality wideout on your roster. And we've talked about this before. I'm not talking about wideout 1. I'm not talking about wideout 2. I'm not even talking about wideout 3. But being that fourth guy, especially in a Saints offense, and it might change as we move to the Dennis Allen era, but we've learned so well over the last almost 2 decades how vital that fourth receiver spot on a New Orleans roster is for coming up with big plays at big times. And Callaway just hasn't lived up to that. He is going to be fighting for his New Orleans Saints life these last 2 weeks. I'm certain that someone, if he were to get cut, would pick him up and give him a shot somewhere else in the league with an opportunity to make the team. Shoot, little Jordan Humphrey got a chance to make a team this year as well. So I think Callaway could and should, but he's definitely going to be playing for that the last 2 weeks. Hopefully the weather conditions are a little bit better. He gets some balls thrown his way. But he has been a shell of what we thought he was going to be. Or even a shell from last season. Because like I said, he got some flack last year. But still, 700 yards and 6 touchdowns is not a bad season, especially for a year 2 guy.
And it's a shame, too, because I like Marquez Callaway. I was one of the ones, I didn't necessarily predict stardom for him, but I saw him as sort of a breakout candidate, a potential good, solid number 3 wide receiver. Once Michael Thomas comes back, and even after they drafted Olave and all that stuff, and it hasn't turned out. I respect your pick of Callaway, but both Callaway and Traquan Smith, I think they've proven what they are. Or more accurately, what they aren't, and that is productive wide receivers in the NFL. The sheer numbers for both Trashquan, and Callaway are bad enough, but then consider this: with a hobbled Landry, and extra defensive attention on Olave, Traquan and Callaway have both had opportunities to step up, and if I'm not mistaken, they have combined for two catches in the last 7 games. So to me, that ship has sailed. I am not even going to waste my time saying that the Saints will need big contributions from either of these guys down the stretch, because we've seen that they cannot do it. However, I am going to stay with the same position. First, I'd like to as far as my number two guy that needs to step up. I'd like to see more plays from Chris Olave, and he has been spectacular this season. I would like to see him take that to another level, I think he's a star now, but with the season absolutely on the line, to see can Chris Olave develop into a superstar, a Justin Jefferson, a Jamar Chase kind of player. Now, if he doesn't do that in the last 2 games, with Andy Dalton at quarterback, that doesn't mean he's not going to be that player. But the guy that I'm looking for is the guy that's complimented him very, very well over the last 6 weeks, and that's Rashid Shaheed. And I don't say this to be disrespectful. I think Shaheed, under the circumstances, has been absolutely spectacular. He is on the short list of the most pleasant surprises for the New Orleans Saints in 2022. But I'd like to see, just like I just said with Olave, I'd like to see Shaheed take it to the next level too. This offseason, the Saints are going to have all kinds of questions throughout their roster. Does Alvin Kamara stay? Again, I keep teasing at that. I almost can't wait for the offseason for that conversation. Does Alvin Kamara stay? Who are going to be the cap cuts? Is Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, guys like that going to be safe? We know that they're going to need to add at running back, even if Kamara does stay at running back, defensive tackle, safety, the quarterback elephant in the room. So with all those roster questions, can Rashid Shaheed be your number 2 wide receiver, or at the very least number 3? Olave is your prime target. He is your star of the unit going into next season. I think that we can all realistically agree that the team cannot move on from Michael Thomas. Even if MT wants that, even if the Saints want that, it's just not financially realistic to do so in 2023. What has been proven is you can't count on Michael Thomas's health at this stage of his career. It's just a dangerous roll of the dice. So I do think that they will bring in other receivers. We just touched on Callaway and Traquan and Keith Kirkwood. As much as we like that young man individually as a person, they're not the answers. Shaheed has proven that he's going to have a roster spot, but it's up to him to show by his performance how big a roster contributing spot that's going to be. Is it going to be a number 3 wideout behind Olave and a healthy Thomas, where the team feels confident? Okay, Mike's down again. We can elevate Shaheed and not really miss a step. Or is Shaheed just a depth guy, a good 4-5 guy, who will give you occasional flashes as a third receiver when asked, but dangerous to count on. That's kind of the crossroads that Rashid Shaheed, an undrafted rookie. So this is unfair expectations I'm putting on him. But can he show that he could be a 2 or a 3 wide receiver for this team in 2023?
Shout out Keith Kirkwood. Neptune Township guy. That's my hometown. So always happy to throw Keith's name around. Unfortunately, he's not a guy that I think will ever permanently stick around. I think he'll forever be somewhere between being a full-time roster guy and Andy Tanner, somewhere in the middle. Tanner got cut and re-signed, like 26 times or something crazy like that. Him and JT Barrett, I think, share the record now for amount of times cut and re-signed. But
it's getting up there.
Yeah, I mean, Keith's been up there a lot, up and down, and even spent a year with the Panthers. But happy he's back, at least on the practice squad. When it comes for me, I'm gonna cheat and not pick a defensive player. I'm gonna say Alvin Kamara's got a lot to prove the last 2 weeks.
And I debated about saying AK.
Yeah, Kamara's got a lot to prove the last 2 weeks, and it's not because we know what Alvin Kamara can be. You even look at the stats this year. They're not awful. And we've said this so many times, Bob. You look at Kamara's stats, and they're not awful. They're not great. But they certainly don't live up to Alvin Kamara's standards, right? And his stats this year, he's right under 500 rushing yards this season. He's got about 1,200 scrimmage yards this year, which in actuality, if he has a good last 2 weeks of the season, he's going to outperform himself in 2019 and 2020, statistically speaking. But what's the issue we've had this year? It's not the scrimmage yards, because he's had plenty of games where Alvin Kamara's looked like Alvin Kamara. Seattle, Vegas, like those 2 games in particular, those are highlight reel stamps. Make sure it's on NFL films when he retires type of games. But then you have games where he hasn't shown up at all. And whether it's his fault for not getting the touches, or not his fault because he hasn't got the touches, or whether it is his fault for not seeming interested, that's kind of the thing we've gone to throughout the season. This year just hasn't lived up to the hype because of 2 things. One, and they referenced it in the game on Saturday against the Browns. We haven't seen the explosive plays this year. We just haven't. Outside of the Raiders game, he took the Texas route for a touchdown against the Raiders. Outside of that, we haven't really seen a big play from Kamara this year. A standout big play, which we saw through the first 5. And 2, he hasn't found the end zone. Has not found the end zone. And I actually don't put that on Kamara at all.
Not all on him, no.
You'd look at a lot of the play calling in the red zone and you're just like, what? And we've talked about not utilizing your best offensive weapon. I think there's fair blame on both sides. So these last 2 weeks, this is the first time all year that Kamara's got back-to-back games of at least 20 touches. I expect the trend to continue. And if he continues to get these touches and he continues to produce the way that he has the last 2 weeks, Alvin, you're good. No complaints. But if he gets these touches and doesn't produce, or he doesn't get touches and the attitude still seems I'm uninterested, then Bob and this teasing thing he keeps doing definitely starts coming into play. Now, I, for one, think he's going to be around. I think at this point, he's the face of the team. And that's where I think some of the disinterest comes from, is if I'm supposed to be the face of your team, why am I not getting the ball? And you start to see what's happened the last 2 weeks. He's got the ball. The Saints have played better as a team. Kamara's played better as a player. I think those things go hand in hand. I don't want to call it a prima donna thing or a diva thing.
No.
But I do think there is a disconnect from what the expectation for Alvin was under Sean after Drew to the expectation that Dennis Allen has for Alvin Kamara post Drew Brees. And hear me out. You have a face of the franchise for, 16 years with Drew, 15, 16 years with Drew Brees. And all of a sudden, and how weird was it, Bob? And you can admit it too, and you guys in the comments can too. How weird was it all of a sudden when you're watching the game on Sunday, or you're watching some other game, and there's a preview for Monday Night Football, and you got the ESPN guys doing all the super deep voiceovers. You're like, this Monday night, the New Orleans Saints, and whoever, and it's not. And it wasn't Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints, but it was Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans Saints battle Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, wait a minute, what? You said who? Where's Drew? That was weird. But Kamara was kind of elevated into being the face of the team. And this year, to be elevated into that role and not see the touches and not see the return of being the face of the franchise, sure, I can understand being disinterested. Well, get Kamara the touches that you have the last 2 weeks and see whether he's disinterested because he doesn't feel like he's being treated as the face of the franchise, or if he's disinterested for other reasons. Or, if you guys can kind of just wipe your hands clean and understand that there's a mutual agreement that everybody's happy and we're going to move forward, or there's a mutual agreement we're going to go separate ways. I probably teased a little bit too much for Bob, but that's why I pick Alvin Kamara as my guy that needs to prove something these last 2 weeks of the season.
Well, yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. And as the face of the franchise, or even just if you don't want to throw that hyperbole onto Alvin, I understand. But at the very least, everybody can agree that this is the focal point of your offense. If you are the focal point of your unit, you need to produce. Now, I agree that part of it is on the coaches. Pete Carmichael, Dennis Allen, combination of the two. There have been games where they haven't gotten him touches. There have been games where they haven't gotten him touches in the right way. You need to get Kamara. You need to get a thoroughbred in space as often as possible. And it hasn't been. In recent weeks, they've done a nice job of trying to do that. End arounds, direct snaps. When you can't get him the ball as a receiver, you do things like that. So I get that. It's nice to finally see that. But on Alvin's side too, and this is why conversations will be had this offseason unless he finishes. If he finishes really strong, I agree with you, Brennan. There's no conversation. Alvin, you're good. You're still our offense going forward. If he doesn't finish strong and he has the opportunities to, then you have to ask yourself, if you're Dennis Allen, if you're back as coach, or if you're Mickey Loomis or whomever, all right, how are we going to rebuild this thing? We have these roster holes, but only this much money to spend and only these many draft picks to do it. Who are our tradable assets? Michael Thomas, financially not responsible, damaged goods, so the value is down. Demario Davis, Cam Jordan, maybe, but they're up there in years. Value is down. Marshawn Lattimore, yeah, he's a high value commodity. But how often do you stumble upon true shutdown cornerbacks? Then you come back around. Alvin Kamara. And I'll drop the mic at that because I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to have that debate. But I think if he doesn't finish the season strong, there are conversations that we are going to have and that need to be had this offseason.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I think he's got a lot to prove these last 2 weeks. And I think equally, and I can't say this, I cannot stress this enough, equally, Pete Carmichael has as much to prove.
Absolutely.
And that could have been I could have had a real loophole on this whole thing and picked Pete Carmichael. Why didn't I do that? But Carmichael, as much as Kamara, they almost go hand in hand. Is if Kamara's going to finish strong, Carmichael's got to finish strong. It's kind of the same thing. And John Butler threw it in the comments. Coaching is right before I said that. Coaching is a big part. No offensive creativity to get AK in space most of the season. Still has 1,200 scrimmage yards. Yes. Show me that creative energy that you had with Alvin the first 5 years of even the year in 19 when he was playing on one leg. The Saints were more creative in getting him the football.
Mm-hmm.
And these stats this year, outside of the touchdowns, is going to beat the 19 season. But again, he was on one leg, and they still were creative and found ways to get him the football. Show me that. Let him run loose, especially against Philly, when more than likely, regardless of who's playing quarterback, at some point in the game, you're going to be playing catch-up. Get the ball.
Or at least happen to match score for score.
Exactly. This isn't a game where you're going to blow Philly out. Right? This is going to be a game it's either going to be tight, you're matching score to score, you're playing catch up. So you got to get the ball to your best player in space and then allow them to make plays. I feel like a broken record, Bob. I feel like we've talked about it all year and criticized all year about not getting the ball to players who can make plays. Again, high school offense. It's annoying. I'm so done talking about this offense, Bob. I am so much have only known Drew Brees. I'm very much that category. I have only known a high-flying offense. I've only covered a high-flying offense, and this is very frustrating. Because I've commentated on all three levels. I've done high school, I've done college, I've done pros, and this is one of the worst offenses I've seen. And I have called games for college football teams that have won like 3 games, I promise. But nonetheless, let's do a little preview of the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, guys, Bob does a great job previewing every aspect of the game every week with the Saints News Network. So head to saints.media. He's already got a couple out for this week, so go ahead and catch up. We won't spoil everything in Bob's articles. That wouldn't be fair to Bob because then Bob doesn't make money, and then we get to see angry Bob. And angry Bob is not pleasant.
And nobody wants to see angry poor Bob.
Angry parentheses poor Bob. Yeah, we don't want to see that. So definitely go out and check out his work talking about how the Saints can take advantage of the Philadelphia Eagles and vice versa, how the Eagles can take advantage of the New Orleans Saints this week. Bob, I kind of alluded to it earlier, so we'll focus on this. Don't know who's playing quarterback this week. Non-committal to whether Hurts is going to be playing or not. So as I alluded to, Gardner Minshew has a good chance of starting for the second straight week. He threw for 300 yards a week ago. But this Philly offense really goes through Miles Sanders, who's had a very good year this year. The Saints have struggled to stop the run. Outside of Miles Sanders, is there another player that Saints fans should definitely keep an eye out this week, whether it be a receiver, an offensive lineman, or another running back?
Oh, God, listen, Philadelphia has weapons everywhere. People love to talk about the athleticism that the Miami Dolphins have in the AFC, the speed that they added this offseason to go with what they already had. Philadelphia, their skill position talent, the athleticism that they have at those skill positions matches every bit what the Miami Dolphins have, only Philadelphia has a better quarterback in Hurts. Miles Sanders has been dinged up with a knee injury. He did not practice today. I do expect him to play. If he's limited, they still can come at you with Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott. Although Sanders has carried the load this year, nearly 1,200 yards on the ground alone, and Gainwell and Scott have both proven that they can be, that they can rush for 100 yards against an NFL defense. Receivers, everybody knows about the physical A.J. Brown, explosive Devontae Smith. Not enough people are talking about how good a tight end Dallas Goedert is. How good a third wide receiver Quez Watkins is. So Philadelphia is going to hit you from with weapons coming from every direction. A couple key things to note, though, to watch on the Eagles injury report. Yeah, obviously Hurts, and like we just said, Sanders. But Lane Johnson, their Pro Bowl right tackle, he is out for the remainder of the regular season. He's holding off surgery. It's a groin injury. He's holding off surgery in hopes that he's going to be ready for the playoffs. But that's something to keep an eye on. And right tackle, that's the side that some guy named Cameron Jordan usually lines up on. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens, with Jordan, how Philadelphia blocks him, how they attack him, because even if Hurts plays, and tomorrow is going to be the key. If Hurts is a DNP, does not practice tomorrow, then I'd bet a lot of money that Gardner Minshew is going to play. But here's the thing: if Hurts doesn't play, Gardner Minshew is a very capable quarterback. I love you. Gardner Minshew is a very capable quarterback, as you've mentioned numerous times tonight, Brendan. But the Philadelphia Eagles offense will be a far different strategic unit than it will be with a healthy Hurts. Because even if Hurts does play with that shoulder, you're not going to see a whole lot of RPO runs from him because they're not going to take any extra chances. So Philadelphia's running attack will probably be a little bit more traditional. And they'll throw the ball a little bit more maybe than they're accustomed to than we're accustomed to seeing. But that doesn't mean that they're going to have Saints defense is going to have an easy time of it. They're still going to have to win those assignments up front because the Eagles, Miles Sanders especially, who I've always been a big fan of. He's a slashing running back. He reminds you a lot of Alvin Kamara in open space. So no matter who's at quarterback, their offensive success is still going to start with Miles Sanders. You're right. They've been burning defenses down the field and deep because it's the running attack is forcing defenses to commit extra players inside the box to clog those running lanes and cutback lanes for Sanders and Hurts. If the Saints could do that with 7 men in the box and manage to hold up in coverage, and get a little bit of pressure on the Eagles' passing attack, that's going to be the key to the game right there. It's kind of widespread.
Is this a Gardner Johnson revenge game? 6 interceptions on the year for Gardner Johnson. Obviously demanded a big payday before the Saints ultimately traded him to Philadelphia. Is this a game where you're going to closely watch Gardner Johnson, whether it be pregame, during the game, extracurricular activity, and postgame?
With Gardner Johnson, it's always it's always after the whistle, and I alongside the play. That's the most entertaining aspect. Brendan, has he been activated from injured reserve yet? I know he's eligible, but I have not seen that he's been activated.
I don't think he has been. I think you're right. Which that could always wait to the very last minute.
It can. But the longer it waits the longer we go during the week without it happening, the less likely it is that he's going to play. And his injury, from what I heard, is very similar to that suffered by Marshawn Lattimore, who has missed, as you know, 10 straight weeks now. Gardner Johnson would miss, has been out 4 weeks. This would be his 5th if he's unable to play. So I would actually be a little bit surprised if he plays. And the Eagles are also going to be without cornerback Avonte Maddox in that backfield. So they're a little bit shorthanded on the back end there. Now, teams that have had offenses that have had success against the Eagles have done so by running the football. So that's going to be key. Kamara and a heavy dose of Taysom Hill, and you have to have success with that. You have to win 1st and 2nd downs, because if you're in 3rd and long, the Eagles will relentlessly rush your quarterback, and force you into mistakes. So if you win first and second down, keep yourself in a manageable third down. If you're third down, conversion percentage. If you're the Saints offense, that'll keep the Eagles defense off balance. Having Chris Olave back, even an 85% Chris Olave with that hamstring, that's going to be key. Otherwise I'm afraid we're going to see a relatively archaic Saints offense, and that kind of offense is going to have a hard time matching up with Philadelphia's explosiveness.
Absolutely. You're right. Gardner Johnson has not been activated. And the more important note of that is the Eagles have not opened up his 21-day practice window, which would give them 21 days to activate him from IR. So would be surprised to see Gardner Johnson play this week. I'll ask you this. This is something you and I haven't really talked about since the Gardner Johnson trade. We had one episode about the Gardner Johnson trade. Is there any hard feelings on your end, or should fans have any hard feelings about Gardner Johnson being traded away?
No, not on my end. I realize it's a business. Any hard feelings I have would be towards Gardner Johnson himself because of the way he conducted himself to orchestrate that trade. There were definitely more professional ways, more classy ways to handle it. But we saw, and really, in my opinion, this dates back well into the offseason as well, right after the draft night, really. Gardner Johnson slipped in the draft a few years ago. A lot of people were calling him a day 2 pick, as high as a second rounder, which again is where I had him mocked to the Saints in the first place. He slipped until day 3 because of character concerns, not his abilities on the football field. We have seen a little bit of those character concerns just before he got traded. Should Saints fans have hard feelings? Maybe. If you look at it the same way that I do, a lot of Saints fans have the harsher feelings towards the Saints front office, though. As you know, and as we've heard seemingly almost all year, they shouldn't have traded him. They shouldn't have. Well, folks, they had no choice. Gardner Johnson had developed into a locker room disruption, and he did that very intentionally, knowing that he could orchestrate a trade, and that's exactly what happened. And as far as the return that they got back for him, because of the way he acted, that increased the Saints' desperation to trade him, that drove down the trade value. And you look at it this way, logically, the Saints dealt Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to an fellow NFC playoff contender, and one that was on their schedule for one, maybe 2 day 3 draft picks. What's that tell you? That tells you that there were no other takers with either a higher trade value, or even within the other conference where you could maybe get him off your schedule for a year or two entirely. That's why and again, I don't have any hard feelings at all. It's a business. But if I do, it would have been more towards Gardner Johnson than the Saints organization.
Yeah, it tells you exactly what you were saying. There wasn't a market for it. Now, for Gardner Johnson, playing on taking a chance on yourself type of a deal, 6 interceptions, has been a big part of a NFC best team. Dude's going to get paid, whether it's by Philly or somebody else. So he bet on himself, and he's going to get paid. Good for him. In terms of should fans have hard feelings, no. Like you said, it's a business, and he gave you some of the most memorable moments of the last couple years. And honestly, I mean, yeah, you wish some things went differently, but that picture of him and Tom Brady is one that's going to be memed for a long time. It's going to be a picture that a lot of Saints fans remember for a long time. Obviously, like I said, you wish some things happened differently, but
I just wish in a perfect world we could have seen a healthy Michael Thomas go up against a healthy Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I would have paid pay-per-view rates for that one.
That would have been fun. But unfortunately, injuries stink. We said kicking is for losers. Injuries are not just for losers. They stink for everybody. Why can't we just have a Madden mode where we turn injuries off and everybody's healthy all year long, every year? Wouldn't that be something? we wouldn't have Hall of Fame careers ruined. But that's just the nature of the beast, I guess. Well, Bob, I don't want to dive into a whole nother segment of talking about the game because we have a 30-minute pregame show for everybody. If not longer, it's New Year's Day, so we might be feeling really good about ourselves while other people are still recovering from hangovers. I don't know, but you and I will be feeling good. So nonetheless, guys, we appreciate you guys tuning in. Bob, I mentioned all those wonderful articles you write. Where can people follow you and your work?
Folks, thank you for tuning in to our episode of the Bayou Blitz tonight, to the last episode of 2022. 2022. I promise you, Brendan and I are going to come on strong and stay strong throughout 2023, and we're doing it for you. You can follow me personally, Bob Rose, ROSE, over on Facebook. I'm at Twitter, on Twitter, at Bobby R2613. As Brendan mentioned, and as we've mentioned throughout the night, all of our works can be followed through the Saints News Network, Saints News Network on Facebook, or at Saints News on Twitter. And obviously, I hope you know anyway, that we have our Bayou Blitz Facebook page available, and at Bayou Blitz Pod over on Twitter. Make those two pages grow. There are various ways to see our shows, to read our contents, to communicate with us. But just like we want you to make the Bayou Blitz your show, and you have been, make the Bayou Blitz groups your groups. Grow them. Get other Saints fans involved. Streamline it. Invite your friends, family members. General advertisements on your own pages. Hey, join the Bayou Blitz group. It's a fun group. It's an interactive group. Y'all have done such a great job of supporting us. That's just one more way to do it. Support your product, make it grow, and we love you for everything you've done so far.
Bob, speaking the truth, for me, you can follow me over on Instagram and Twitter at BT Boylan. I noticed you said you're at Twitter again, so you're still throwing your name in that hat for CEO of Twitter. Yeah, we need an actual campaign for that. So if someone wants to start that campaign for Bob, it's not going to be me, but somebody can. Nonetheless,
you're not going to go down with the ship.
I am not hopping on that one. That would be bad PR for me. I have a bad.
You know what? 2023, we'll call it the year of the coup. We'll take over Twitter. We'll take over the NFL commissioner's office. The Bayou Blitz will take over all sports airwaves. 2023, the year of the coup.
I'm not. That sounds dangerous and not fun dangerous. That just sounds dangerous. I don't know how I feel about that. Anyway, you can follow all my work with the Saints News Network at saints.media. Follow my fantasy stuff. Hopefully some of you guys are in championships this week. I know I am. Without patting myself on the back too much. I'm sorry, Bob. I'm sorry. 1 point away from the playoffs. That stings. But so hopefully some of you guys are in your championships. You guys need some advice. Some of you guys have Derrick Henry and don't know what to do. So make sure you tune into what I got set up for you guys this week. I almost forgot. I got some giveaway news for you guys. Right. So we're going to have our New Year's / Christmas giveaway. And we want to reward some of you guys for being so kind to us, like Bob mentioned. So we're going to run one for social media and one just for YouTube because some of you guys don't have social media. So for our social media one, we're going to run that through Facebook and Twitter, through the Bayou Blitz Twitter page and the Bayou Blitz Facebook page. Just more incentives to follow us if you don't already. So we're going to be giving away two New Orleans Saints Funko Pops. I won't reveal which player it is, but there's a Michael Thomas one, an Alvin Kamara one, and a Drew Brees one. We will be giving away a Funko Pop. We will have all of our contest details on Facebook and Twitter.
I ordered up all the Traquan Smith ones already.
You act like Traquan got one. Nonetheless, and for our YouTube family, we will also be releasing some further details for you guys, since you're not going to be able to log on to Facebook or Twitter to see how you can do it. We will be letting you guys know live on the shows. So definitely tune in so you guys know how you can get entered to win said Funko Pops. So I think we've done enough promoting of ourselves and our own work and all that stuff. I also wanted to give a quick happy birthday shout out to the boss, Kyle T. Mosley, 24 years old. Super proud of you, Kyle. You finally got there. But nonetheless, happy birthday, Kyle. Thank all of you guys for tuning in for yet another episode of the Bayou Blitz podcast. Bob and I will be back Sunday for the pregame show. We got to say Sunday. I almost said Saturday. That's bad. They've got us all sorts of messed up lately, Bob. We're saying Saturdays, Sundays, Thursdays, Mondays.
Vote Rose 2023, and that won't happen.
He's making promises now, guys. See, this is why I can't be a campaign manager for you, Bob. You start making promises, you're going to do away with days of the week. You're going to start doing away with time zones. You're going to, yeah, I can't hop on that one. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. John Butler, you can hop on and be the manager. Gypsy, you can be the manager of
Gypsy's definitely going to be our campaign manager. John Butler, we learned back in the last presidential election, the Rose Everett campaign mantra didn't work. That's why we're reversing it. It will be an Everett Rose coup this year, but John Butler is going to be an integral part of that. He made that very clear during the last presidential election.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, see, I'm gonna take my name and I'm gonna throw it that way, far away, for now. If you guys get super successful, I was a supporter since day one. We'll see. We'll bandwagon it. We'll bandwagon it for sure. Well, guys, thanks so much for tuning in this week. Hope you guys had as much fun as we did. We will see you guys Sunday for the pregame show. Saints at Eagles, a must-win for the Saints to stay alive in that playoff hunt. I can't believe we're still talking about it, Bob. But until then, you guys find peace, spread love, practice positivity. We'll see you guys on Sunday afternoon. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.